came to South Street because I just graduated from the University of Pennsylvania, and I wanted to continue to be among artists, and I knew some artists who had moved to the area. They had moved because it was cheap rent, a lot of space, and when I arrived, I found that to be the case. Plus, there was a lot of empty, I guess there was a lot of empty space. I mean, I don't know how else to say it. Every third building was occupied, meaning 2 out of 3 were empty, and there was trash blowing down the street. It was really ripe for experimentation.
When we came here into this place, I think we were looking for a great big space to follow our ideas and visions of dance and movement and community, all those together. And along with dance and movement there was film and multimedia and a company, and we needed a studio, and we actually needed a studio and a place to live. And so we found this building here way back then.
Then we began to look for our own studio space. And the first studio we found was in Roxborough. And somehow we must have heard of South Street. I don't remember how, but we looked in the area for a space, for a studio space. And we found the space on 5th and South, which was the old L. Berman clothing store. And it was still full of clothes. And it was like just as if somebody had just left it. You know, there was still the clothes racks in there and shelves and all. And so we rented that space, the whole building. And the company lived on the 2nd floor. The studio was on the 1st floor. And the 3rd floor we had rented out to some students. And that's how we started on South Street.
Well, I'd gone to South Street many times when I was working in the Society Hill area, restoring colonial buildings, because they had a lot of real good restaurants. Like the Delis were still there, and some real good soul food. It was a very inexpensive kind of neighborhood, kind of waiting to be torn down. And then Rick Snyderman asked me if I wanted to build the works for him. So I went down and I was building a store on the 300 block. And I ran into a friend from previous years that said they had an apartment they wanted to rent in the building they were renting across the street. So I went over and it was a beautiful 4-room apartment, had a little roof area I could go out on, and had a backyard. It was real nice. And it was $25 a month. I said, gee, I can't resist it. I wasn't planning to live there, but for that kind of deal, I thought I'd take it for a little bit to see what happened. And then I kind of just got involved, and I stayed there for 18 years.
The street looked, in the early 60s, middle 60s, you saw a lot of empty buildings. And you couldn't get a rental out of it. No one around. A lot of my friends left, moved out, took the money that that redevelopment gave them for their property and just left it, figuring this was the best they can get. It wasn't good. I never did. That was a bad time in our life, and yet my business was always on an increase. But other stores, for instance, the clothing stores started going out. Little by little, we could see that. Barker's were still there, but there seemed to be another type of clothing store coming in that we saw. There were other newer ones coming in where a Barker wasn't necessary. A lot of these things were changing. The delis that we used to see, very few of them now. And That was in fact, at that time, I told my father we have to leave. We have to leave our business and go elsewhere. Either we're going to move to the Northeast, or we're going to stay in the street. If we stay in the street, we're still going to be in the way of the Crosstown Expressway, which will get us, means us we're going to have to leave again. But this is where we decided to stay. One of the few businesses. Now I'm talking about myself and our business, but that seemed to be we were one of the few stores that hung around and keep it up and see what we can do.
And we came here in 1968, and I think at least half of the stores on the 400 block were vacant. And the people that were here were old-timers who had been here for at least 20 or 30 years themselves, ready to retire, and they thought of the city and the government coming in to make a expressway here as their retirement money. And so they were all for it, although they did like to see the new life that was coming in. So we did come in with blessings and a little regret, I think, on the part of the old businessmen who were no longer living in this area. They had all moved out to the suburbs, but they weren't still doing business. And there were service businesses to the community, basically. There were grocery stores and children's clothing stores, and for the Jewish community, there were Jewish butchers and wine. Margolis wines were here, and for the Italian community, there was specialty stores selling salamis and their food stuff. And then there were some big warehouses that had been on the street, like a plate glass warehouse that stayed because they could still use it and didn't care if there were people shopping on the street or not. But there were furniture stores, and of course the famous men's clothing stores that I think every man over 60 remembers buying his first suit at. So they still stayed, and we still have Crafts Brothers on the street. So they stayed. A lot of them have left, of course.
Everyone was starting out. We were all out of either art school or theater or architecture or changing careers altogether. Social planning. I mean, there really was a lot of urban planners attracted to us or had been on the fringe of that. And the fact that everyone was so open in their art and displayed it publicly, you know, made it very accessible. And people weren't locked off into their studios and, you know, untouchables. It was very user-friendly art. And everyone was selling stuff very cheaply at that time. And everyone was making something. It was a little like the Balinese say, you know, we don't have a word for art. Everything we do is life.
Well, I wouldn't say that I wouldn't put that in the past and say how did it work, because it continues to work. For me, it's an integral part of how I live my life. Is collaborating with other artists and improvising. I don't see how anybody can live without improvising. And just being aware that life is an improvisation actually makes it more possible to use it in a way that really gives access to the process of creating your life. You know? When you improvise also, some things don't work out. And but also, when you improvise, you do things that you would never have done. You find yourself doing things that you didn't think of before. And that's what improvisation is. It's trying something, putting yourself in maybe a situation that is slightly off balance or somewhat threatening, or working with the unknown. You know? And things turn up. And the other part of that is being willing to recognize something when it shows up, and
be able to use it, make it useful to yourself.
So, in this long, rambling answer, what I'm also saying is that I think I left the theater to go to the theater of the street, to the encounter of what was happening right now at this point. And that was very exciting.
It was also that it was something, the place was like a place waiting to happen.
Yeah, I guess that's a good way to put it. Mm-hmm.
When you go someplace, you usually think that this place, you know, you go to a certain city or a certain place and you think this is how it is. And when we came to South Street, it wasn't like anything.
Mm.
It had been something, but it was waiting to become something again. And I think we saw that as an opening to create.
And I guess one of the things that was really fun, and because we used inflatables a lot, and we were enormously helped by Al Johnson of Alley Friends at that time, who contributed the inflatables. And so on 5th and South, there was, well, now it's built up, but it was all abandoned at that time. There was a lot. And one morning we showed up after we had planned this as part of the day, and we laid out this bubble, and we started inflating it, and it's going, and you know, people start coming, cops appear. They're in their red, Rizzo red at that time, and this is 1971 or 2. You know, who's doing this? You know, we're doing this. We're part of the, as usual, we followed our dictum, which is, you know, go ahead and do it. Don't ask for permission because you'll never get it. So we started, and the cops arrived. They don't know what's going on. Who says you can do this? Oh, this is part of the first building of the High Centennial. We said, we're doing our prototype now, South Street Day and all this, and just tell them stuff. And they're, you know, it's rising. And kids are showing up and all this. And this huge bubble, I'm talking about, you know, that occupies, you know, 30 by 60 feet. I mean, big. And then we gave, as part of our psychology, we gave all the kids spray cans. And we said, go spray your names, anything you want, all over the outside of this thing, you know. So, in other words, part of the idea was to invite people in and make them part of the process rather than outside. And it wasn't like, we're doing this for you and aren't you lucky, but help us build it. So they sprayed their names all over and anything they wanted, you know, so they were really into it. And we had a band. We put a band inside, and then we had a door, and we said, you got to take your shoes off when you go in this thing. And this jamming band, great band, rock and roll band, played all afternoon, and people coming, winos, left, right, and center, everyone coming in and just rocking the place out in this bubble. And the metaphor is good because it was totally fragile. Anyone at any time could have stuck a knife in that thing and destroyed it. Everything was hanging on a balance, and all our stuff always seemed to be right on the edge. And yet, it was magical. Everyone was totally blown out by it.
Yeah, we created this thing called South Street Day. And Bob Bruckman and myself, we got some money from the community pool of money that we had. And we bought these red, white, and blue parking lot banners. And we went all the way down to about 25th and South. And we strung these banners that, you know, zigzag across the street, all the way to 8th and South. And as we were going down the street, people would say, well, what are you doing? Especially up at the higher end, where it was still pretty abandoned up there. And we said, oh, we're having a parade this Saturday. It's called South Street Day. And they would like start yelling across the street, oh, hey, did you hear it's going to be South Street Day? Let's have a big barbecue. And every block that we went down South Street, you know, through 1600 blocks, 1700 block, were lawn-side barbecues and all. Everybody was so excited that there was going to be this parade down South Street. They couldn't believe it. I mean, this is an abandoned kind of slum neighborhood, you know, waiting to be torn down for the highway. And we came down and we strung these banners. It looked incredible. I mean, just blocks and blocks and blocks of these red, white, and blue banners. And that Saturday we had a parade that came down South Street that had a black marching group, you know, that did like almost like a dance they did, and we had musicians and we had clowns and we had all kinds of things. It went from one river to the other, and we created this energy, and every single block participated. There wasn't one block that you could go on South Street that didn't have people out barbecuing, doing something, you know, having kids play games in the street or whatever. And we didn't have the street closed at all. We just the parade came down the street, and there was no traffic really that we blocked. Anybody got behind the parade, it was turned off. And that started it. It was like we sent this line of energy right down South Street. And everybody liked it, and we had a good time, so we decided to do another one at Halloween, and we did. We had a big Halloween thing. Following year, we had a big spring festival again, and then Halloween again. And nobody actually had to do anything. I mean, you weren't like forced to do it. People actually just did it. And when things would be happening, I was sure like a bunch of people would start doing something, all of a sudden people would get involved. Like a lot of the older people who were still there, who were kind of very defeated. You know, they lived in this neighborhood and they were waiting for the highway. You know, oh, we're going to get $2,000 for building the highway. Well, even they got into the spirit of it. And I remember the day we planted the trees, which was my birthday, 1971. We started, there were about 4 of us out there. We had a truckload of trees and a jackhammer, and we were breaking up the concrete. As the day went on, more and more people would come by, and they say, what are you doing? And we would say, we're going to plant like 20, 25 trees in the neighborhood. And they would go, oh, great, I'll help you. And then they would say, well, where do you want me to work, or something, whatever. And then they would start working there. And one of the women who had lived in the neighborhood for many years, who was like very defeated and, you know, thought the neighborhood was horrible and it wasn't going to be anything, and thought we were all nuts. I mean, what are these crazy people doing here? About halfway through, she brought out a whole table of cold drinks for us, and she like became our assistant or like our mom or something. She was making sure we all had drinks and we didn't get too overheated and all. And it was an incredible day. I mean, the street got to be so busy. There were maybe 50 or 60 people working, you know, carting away the concrete, putting in the trees, you know, and a lot of businesses that didn't want the trees, you know, they didn't want them in front of their property. All of a sudden they were coming over and saying, oh, we have an extra tree, could I have one else? It's really great. I mean, there were a lot of people who didn't want it. They were saying it would destroy the drains, and caterpillars would fall on my customer, and they had all kinds of stories as to why you couldn't, but Fairmount Park, they had this tree program to any community that wanted trees at that time. And it was our friend, who's now the head of Fairmount Park, is a relative of his, I don't know how they're related, but Lydia Hahn lives in my building, and she knew about the trees, and I said, sure, I'll go. I had the only vehicle in the neighborhood. I had a panel truck. It was like the community vehicle. I went off and got the jackhammer and came back. And it was like another one of those beautiful days, but we fixed up the abandoned properties, we painted them, you know, and in a way we did it illegal, you know, it's actually illegal to go paint somebody's property, but most of the owners either live in Atlantic City or Florida or were dead, you know, 25 years, and who would care that we painted their building? You know? But we made it real beautiful for ourselves, and we invited the rest of the world to come and have fun with us. And we did, really. There were 2 Orthodox synagogues that were kind of abandoned in a sense, and we only had a few older people, and they would always come down to South Street to recruit some of the Jewish people to make what they call minyan to have their service. And I guess the best time about that was we always had Passover holiday as a neighborhood holiday. It was really like just a big feast that we would have. And one year we had our Seder in a Middle Eastern restaurant. And we all dressed as Arabs, and we were having a Seder, like a traditional kind of Seder with the Seder and everything. And one of the old men from the synagogue came down the street and he was looking for somebody to help make the service. So he came into our festivities, and he realized we were having a Seder, but it just didn't quite look right to him. And he asked if somebody would like, he said, I don't want to interrupt your Seder because I realize it's very important doing a Seder, and he could relate to that. But I need one man to make the minyan for the synagogue. And Ron Kaplan got up, and it was just in total Arab garb, and like walking around the corner to this Orthodox synagogue to help them like make what they needed for their holiday. And we kind of did that. We like broke all the rules in a sense, just to be part of a big family.
And Wolfie was a performer on South Street and a painter. And we went to his performance 12 times, and each night it was different. And it was so magical. And we took our children, and they got something out of it too. Actually, our children went with us to mostly all of the events. And they've certainly been influenced very strongly by their lives on South Street. Wolfie used to live at the corner of 4th and South, above Cafe Yaz, and he lived in a plastic bubble because the building was bombed out. And in the bubble, he had a hot plate and a bureau, and he had his famous pillows. And when we would have house tours, his place would be on the tour, and many other very odd spaces. Now, Society Hill would have their house tour about the same time, maybe the same day as ours. So you had a choice of going to one or the other. Wolfie never had heat. And then after he lived on South Street, he moved to Old City in a very large space. And then he moved to Elkins Park in a school building. And he never had heat there. And now he's finally moved to New Mexico, outside of Santa Fe, where he doesn't need heat as much. And he lives in a church building again. And it's kind of, makeshift. But he just bought land, and he's going to build his house. And he's now has a successful clothing business. Tom Bissinger lived in the neighborhood, and he had his first child, a son. And there was a fruit vendor on 4th Street named A.B. And A.B. had been at the corner of 4th and South with his stand. And Jim's Steaks was built on that corner, and they didn't want A.B. there anymore. So Tom offered to have him moved in front of his building. And that was done. And we used to go and buy vegetables from A.B. because you couldn't get by without doing that. Isaiah supported him really, totally, every day. And when Tom's son was born, everybody closed, and A.B. served boiled potatoes in Tom's building, and we all came.
Well, there was a lot of at one point we were only open Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays because we had just had a baby, and we used to put our baby in the window, and people would always come back or pass by our window and of course look at him and coo at him and take care of him in a sense that they would entertain him. And then around the corner was an older man who sold outside horseradish, ground horseradish and fruit and vegetables, and his name was A.B. And A.B. was standing outside winter and summer, all during the year. And he loved his ippies, as he called us. And when Ezekiel was small, I used to wheel him out in the carriage, and A.B. would rock him for hours, and all the people he knew from the window would salute him on the corner of 4th and South. So he had a very nice way of entertaining himself in this neighborhood.
I was good at keeping, at being a daddy, or I think I was good at being a daddy. We had Zeke, our first son, he's 23 years old now, and that's how we tell how long we've been on South Street. We've been on South Street for 23 years. And Zeke was born in October 29th, 1969. We opened the Eyes Gallery December 1st, 1969. And so he spent his early years in the store, in the window of the store, actually. He was our best product, our draw. He was our neon light.
We took an abandoned lot next to Nuke Wexler's on 3rd and South, where I believe John's Cafe is today. That was a scuzzy, dirty, dumped-in lot. And I guess the state owned it. And one of the things we learned was you don't go ask the state for permission to do anything because they'll put you through red tape. So we just decided we would clean it up. So we cleaned it up, and we decided we would make a playground for the kids there, because there were a lot of kids in those days, plus the 5th and South gang was there. And so you had to be aware of whose turf you were playing on, because 5th and South was sprayed on the walls. It was very much a transition neighborhood. And so we invited these kids to help us, and we took old pilings and timbers and and Joyce that were that were either scattered on Delaware Avenue, because at that time I-95 had not gone in, so there were a lot of abandoned buildings. And we took recycled materials and made this park, and then we hired a band with a guy called Matt Hopkins, who is or was a local musician. I don't know if he's still playing music, but he was a fantastically gifted black musician who taught, or maybe still teaches at Settlement, I'm not really sure. And he played several instruments, and he was very magical. And we played music and had a day and just announced that this was a people's park. And we had everyone come out and dance, and it was a wild affair. And in the middle of this day, I'm recalling now, somehow Matt flipped out the 5th and South Street gang, who started to get really violent, and I could see the whole thing turning, and this was going to just turn into chaos. And he went into some kind of like faint trance. I don't know if he was hit or what, but he just went stone cold, and it just like chilled everything at that moment. And we sort of lifted him out like Christ on the cross and took him over to George and Kathy Keegan's house and sort of brought him back to life. And in a way, it sort of saved the day, because it could have gotten very violent. I think at that time, there was always an edge to existence down there on South Street, a very real one. But
in the early days of South Street, it was one every 3-4 hours, one customer every 3 or 4 hours. I remember one night I was down in the basement working with ceramics. I did ceramic pins, and I used ceramics to make collage mirrors that we would sell. And I was in the basement working, and my sister Marcia was storekeeping that night. We were supposed to be there until the theater left out at around 10:30, and then we would get a few customers. And I called up to Marcia. I said, "What time is it?" And she said, "My watch isn't working." So I went back to work, and I said, I called up again. I don't know, it must have been an hour later. I said, "The theater must have let out already." And so I came up, and indeed the street was empty, a ghost town. You could see the wind had carried some newspapers through the street, and that was the only sound out there. Except then there came a car, and the car stopped on 4th Street, screeching stop, and came back and parked right in front of our store. And these two guys came out of the car, and boy, they looked heavy. They looked heavy. They walked in the store, and you could see them close up, and these were really, really heavy guys, thugs. I could see the gun outlined in the man's back pocket. And he said, "You're open now." And I said, "Yeah, sure, come on in, come on in." I said, "We haven't made a sale all day." I said, "Look, anything here, half price, a quarter price, just take it away. Come on, Charlie, let's get out of here." And out they went. We closed up. We were ready to close up. That's the way South Street was then. You know, people now say there's so much violence on South Street, and so it's not a good place to be. But they don't remember what it was like then. They don't remember. Right?
I was a guy out of college and art school, and was struggling to find a milieu in which I didn't have to dissimulate to fit in. And I found it. I found a lot of people who were like me. And that was great. And how many people can find that? I think that's important to have those communities in every city.
you could do what you wanted, and people weren't going to interfere with you. And I think that was a very strong principle, and one that we felt as Philadelphians, the city of brotherly love and sisterly love, that this was an important concept, that there was something here to cherish. So I would say in that sense, we were artist citizens, and that there was a real feeling for the birth of freedom and that we in the 60s and 70s were re-encountering that birth of freedom for ourselves and feeling really strong that we were helping ring that bell of freedom a little bit, or maybe shine it a little bit, treasure it, and keep it alive in our hearts, in our work, in our public attitudes, in our helping to build something without demanding rewards for it exactly.
It was about a 6-block area in Philadelphia where people were real, just the best way you could be, or something you could say. You know, you shared everything, you were helpful to people, you supported people, you didn't have prejudice about what color you were, your religion, or sexual orientation. It didn't matter. You know, and it took a very dead, abandoned neighborhood and made it like one of Philadelphia's most beautiful neighborhoods. The South Street had a composition of all kinds of people. It had very young people, there were teenage runaways who had come from California because they heard about South Street or somewhere, and there were people all the way up to like the age of 60, 65 who had like dropped out of society and become the new generation, whatever we were called in those days. And the most remarkable thing about it was that there was no separation of age. Just like this, the thing about the color and the religion and all that. It's like everybody was the same age. So when you came somewhere, you know, how old you were treated like in the same manner. So we kind of like neutralized each other out. You know, it was not like being too old or real young. And, it really changed how things are. It wasn't like the structured adult things and the structured kid things. I mean, there were just like things, and if the kids were playing, they would also go play with the kids and be like the kids. You know, sometimes the kids would be like the adults. They would go and clean up or go somewhere.
Well, it was a very mixed community, because South Street was a kind of deserted area in that everyone was waiting for the expressway to come through. So it was what we call city blight, because nothing was happening. So if anything, just people were moving out. But the people that were here were young people who were looking for cheap places to live, that either were involved with the Theater of the Living Arts, which was down here, or going to the art schools, or young nurses and medical students who were involved with the hospitals, or the old people, older, I don't mean old, but people who had lived here all their lives, from the Italian community, the Jewish community, the black community, that was all